r/AskReddit. Hunters of Reddit, what did you see out there that made you not want to go back into the woods? My father and I were following a trail for a while, so we decided to take a break and catch our breaths. I sat on a log off the trail and my dad stood on the edge of the trail waiting for me to get up. I hear some movement and scan around, and I see a man, dressed casually, walking quickly down the trail with a Glock in his hand. He is not really following the trail, he is just walking toward my dad with haste. Before he comes up to my dad, he asks if he's seen anything. Pretty normal. I keep an eye on him, because I don't believe he was there to hunt. I think he was there to make sure my dad hadn't seen anything he wasn't supposed to. He wasn't dressed like a hunter, he didn't walk like a hunter, and it was deer season and he decided he would take his Glock out to get a deer. I wasn't buying, so I put a round in the chamber and watched them talk. He seemed to be confident until my dad mentioned that he was here with me and gestured in my direction. I nodded and made a half-assed wave, and he seemed to lose interest in us and ended the conversation shortly after and turned around and walked back the way he came, just about as fast as he walked up to us. It worried us a bit, but we continued on. We hadn't been back to that area in a while. My dad told me that there have been drug busts near that area in the past. This isn't a supernatural tale, just an experience that made me not want to go back to that area. A long time ago my grandparents bought a small cabin in the woods in Pennsylvania. My dad, uncle, and aunt are all small children. My father told me this story. They're all sitting around outside with a small fire going when they hear branches breaking and footsteps coming from the darkness. They think it's a black bear because it's close, but they can't see it. It seems to be going straight for my uncle, the littlest of the children. He starts panicking while everyone tells him not to move. Now this big black beast is within arm's reach of him, and he's shaking like a leaf with his eyes closed. All of a sudden it opens its jaws and starts licking his face. Turns out that the next property over is owned by a couple who raise Newfoundland dogs and one got out. My family owns a couple hundred acres of forest in eastern NC. No one lives on the property anymore and hasn't for the last 6 or 7 years. We went down there to do some target shooting in October of 2017, and I decided to go walk through the outskirts of the woods to locate a good limb for our range marker. As I'm walking, literally and proverbially kicking rocks, I come across a fairly nice, but practically brand new looking suitcase, full of clothes and other personal effects. No ID, nothing with any sort of identifying markers on them, but seemed to be clothes for 4 people, 2 kids and 2 adults, 1 male and 1 female. Had some food, coloring books, etc. There was a makeshift lean-to about 100 yards farther into the woods. Set up a trail camera and left it there for 3 weeks. Never saw anyone. For reference, this is 35 miles from any sizable town or city. I've got one good one. I have a hunting spot that I frequent. Not crazy far off the grid or anything like that. Terrain is a pain in the ass, but it's a pretty hidden spot that is close to my house. Anyway, I hunt a lot of small game there and see a ton of mule deer anytime I go out. One morning I get there about 5:30 am and have some time to kill before I start my hiking. I have an odd feeling in the parking lot, but just chalk it up to too much coffee on an empty stomach giving me anxiety. So, I decide to start hiking in, and about 300 yards into my hike I notice this pile of downed trees / branches / general debris that I hadn't seen before. It was my first time hunting this particular place this particular season, so I figure some folks came out and did some fire mitigation work. I don't pay too much attention to it until I notice there's an odd amount of movement coming from it. Pretty small movements, but it sticks out when a brush pile is wiggling on a still day. It was also about 5:45 am, and the wilderness just sort of has this stillness to it at that time that any movement is noticeable. So, I stop and start examining the pile to figure out what's going on. I figure there's a rabbit in there, maybe some squirrels. I figure I've hit the jackpot, and I'm definitely about to bag something. I start deciding the best way to flush whatever is going on in there and still have my shotgun up in time to take a good shot. I realize I'm standing by a decent sized branch and my best move is to just stomp on the branch. If all goes according to plan, everything will freeze, then whatever is in there will dart out. I try to figure out where the rabbit will come out of, get ready, and bam, I stomp on the branch and snap it in half. The pile goes still, and that stillness and quiet is back. Then, a mountain lion, with a bloody nose and mouth, pops up out of the pile. At this point, I'm about 10 yards from the pile. I have my shotgun, but really don't want to shoot the lion. I also don't want to fire a shot off in the air to scare it, because all in all this was a pretty cool experience that very few people get to have. It froze and was looking at me very quizzically. Then, in one quick motion it hopped out of the brush pile, ran uphill, got about 40 yards from me, and disappeared into the trees. I've never seen something cover 40 yards uphill in such a fast, graceful way. One of the cooler things I've ever gotten to experience. I went to check out the brush pile when it left, and sure enough it was feasting on a mule deer. Still my favorite out in the woods story I ever tell. When I was a kid, a poacher must have thought I was a deer or something, and shot around at me. It impacted on a tree above my head. I immediately fired 3 shots as fast as I could, not at the shooter, but in the air. In my hunting group, immediate 3 shots means help basically. My dad and our hunting club immediately came out to find out what the fuck happened by honking the horns of their trucks letting me know they were coming. I basically laid on the ground until I could tell they were near the dirt road. Told them what happened and guessed it was probably a road poacher trying to get a deer as it came from the same road. They didn't see him. It was private property and we were always very aware of who was at what location and who was hunting where. Nobody was supposed to be in the part one was at. Scared the shit out of me. This was mid-90s. Reason why I don't like hunting on public property is cause of that. And I don't know the people out there. Not a hunter, but a fly fisherman who spends every weekend out hiking remote rivers and streams in search of brown trout. I live in Montreal. My normal routine is to drive down to a river that starts in upstate New York. Fish a couple kilometers of the river where no one really lives or goes. Then head across the border and head back down to the river on the Canadian side. So I'm out there on morning by myself. I had been out there over 100 times, so it wasn't new territory by any means. That said, I was getting close to the area where other anglers had warned me about angry landowners and threats from dudes with shotguns, so I was pretty alert. I come down to the section of river there it kinda splits around a little island. 50'x 100 foot kinda island before it reconnects and the Who River veers off to the left. Most days I stay left of the island. There are few holes. This day I went right, so my view up the river was obscured until I came around the corner of the island. I get to the point, look up, and about 250 feet in front of me, I'm standing there looking at a beige golden animal that's crossing the river. First thought, someone's dog. HMN. No homes. Too remote of an area. I'm standing there looking at this thing crossing the river, and the things are just racing through my head, because what I'm looking at doesn't make sense for where I'm standing. This thing still hasn't seen me, it's just gingerly making its way through about 1-2 feet of water trying to cross across at a determined walk. That's when I notice the tail. I know a lot of dogs, but I've never seen a tail like. Hair on the back of my neck goes up. Fucking shit. I'm looking at a mountain lion in upstate New York about a kilometer from the Canadian border. I take a step back behind the tree. I stood there for another few seconds watching this thing cross. When it got to the other side it bound up a washout bank up about 20 feet in a couple bounds. There was no doubt about what I saw. I'm not a hunter, but I do a lot of hiking and mountain biking in the woods. Nothing has ever made me not want to go back, but there has been some weird shit. First, there's just a lot of weird stuff in the woods. Teepees, altars, lean toss, shrines, etc. Some of it's pretty creepy, but I think most of it is just built by bored people who are trying to make something creepy, so that makes it a bit less scary. Among the strangest of these things that I've seen are a large clearing of trees with all but one entrance blocked off by webs of red strings and a giant stone pentagram stretched across the clearing, 30-foot diameter, a wooden tunnel leading to a small room containing defaced religious icons, Buddha statues, crucifixes, Stars of David, etc., and dozens/hundreds of creepy Polaroid pictures hanging from the ceiling. Ones I remember include a close-up face shot of a girl sleeping, a dude brushing his teeth taken from outside of the window, and a photo booth strip of two girls where one of their faces are crossed out, and "I'm glad you're dead" written with one word on each picture, and a number of weird little shrines with creepy scriptures printed or scrawled into them. But what's a lot scarier to me is stuff that isn't meant to be creepy like the aforementioned things hopefully are. I once heard a distant panic scream followed by a crashing/thudding sound. I couldn't tell from which direction it came from, and I didn't hear anything else, so I have no idea what it was. I think the creepiest thing I've experienced was one time while walking home from school through the woods. I heard people talking in the distance, and I couldn't hear what they were saying, but they seemed to be arguing. They were quiet for a minute, and then I heard them again. Really close now. The forest was really dense here, so although they sounded maybe 15 to 20 feet away, I couldn't see them or pinpoint exactly where they were. This time I could hear what they said. Guy 1, "It's fucked up, you guys always make me." Guy 2, in a hushed voice, "Shh, someone's coming." Guy 1, now also hushed, "Shit." Guy 3, from a bit further to my left than the other guys, who sounded to be mostly right in front of me, "Hurry." Rustling noise. Guy 1, "Fuck." Guy 2, "Shh." I came around a corner and expected to see them, but I couldn't see anyone. I kept walking, cautious and trying to be aware of my surroundings. About 10 feet past the corner I saw something to the left of the trail, close to where the voices were coming from, that caught my eye. It was a bunch of stuff wrapped up in a big tarp. It wasn't completely wrapped up, and you could kind of see into it. All I could see was something glass, and I wanted to see what it was. I scanned the forest behind the tarp to make sure nobody was watching, and then stepped towards it. Suddenly, one of them says, "Keep walking," very calmly. I looked back into the forest, but still couldn't see anyone. They said, "Go," still calm. I looked for another second, still unable to see a soul, and then turned and kept walking like nothing happened. I don't know what was going on, but the whole thing gave me the creepiest vibe I've ever gotten. I spend a lot of time in the backcountry in the wintertime. Usually it's just me and a friend. Most trails we do are popular in the summer and totally dead once it starts to snow. Winter in *2014, we've hiked about 2 miles in and see this small black backpack in the middle of the trail. We hadn't seen any other cars at the trailhead or any people around, but this backpack hadn't been there long because there wasn't any snow on it. It had snowed the night before. It was a very odd sight. We figured if it was still on the trail, when we looped around we'd pick it up. About 4 miles in, and my friend and I are chatting away when I notice a large figure flailing in some trees up ahead. We go quiet and can hear this man rambling while he's pacing. At this point we are pretty freaked out and decide to turn around when we hear "Oh, Hawaii there," and this guy starts walking towards us, and then out pops another guy with a very pricey looking video camera. It turned out this flailing guy was actually a rapper, and they were filming a music video for one of his new songs out in the forest. They had parked before the trailhead, so we didn't notice their car. They ended up being super friendly and gave us a card, and we figured out it was their backpack we had seen on the trail a few miles before. We said our goodbyes and walked out. But hot damn, I was sure we were about to be killed in the woods. Edit. Holy shit. Wow. So many people. So many things. I did not expect this. Also updated the year to 2014. I will try my hardest to find the rap video / artist. But as I've explained in the comments, my mind was a little stuck on "Wow, we are not being murdered right now, how nice." And it was 4 years ago. Edit 2. It was not the Migas video. But keep sending me other music videos that you think it might be, because I have no idea where to begin. We are gonna find this out together, guys. I missed this trip with my dad and his hunting buddy. They were in a remote section of southeastern Wyoming hunting for elk. Like any good elk hunter, they were up at 3:30 to stake out their spot and watch the herd patterns before daylight. As they were driving up to the spot, a figure appeared in their headlights, and by their silhouette, it wasn't a hunter. What was a person doing walking down the road in complete darkness with no hunting gear? My dad was driving, so he slowed to a crawl in his truck, and his buddy prepared his sidearm, as this had foul play written all over it. When they could distinguish the figure in the headlights, they saw it was a girl in a tank top and underwear, wearing no shoes on. They stopped and verbally checked her status out the window, as there could have easily been somebody staked out in the sagebrush, ready to ambush. When it was clear she was severely hypothermic and bleeding from her feet, they got out and let her in the truck cab. From there, it had to have been a terrifying experience for that girl. I sure wouldn't want two middle-aged rednecks picking me up 40 miles from any town. They cranked up the heat full blast and drove her to a nearby country gas station, where they were regular customers and friends with the owner and his wife, who was a retired nurse. When the girl could finally articulate her words, she told them that she and her boyfriend drove out there to drink and have sex. When she started having a seizure during sex, he lost his temper, grabbed her shoes, and threw them into the sage. When she got out of the car to find them, he peeled off, leaving her in near freezing temperatures in her skivvies. She estimated she walked about 4 miles on a dirt road before my dad found her. It's a good thing hunters start early, because she easily could have died. Edit. Thanks for the awesome response. My dad is a real great guy and a true Wyoming man. He seriously was more upset about getting to the elk spot late than anything else, haha. And to anybody doubting the veracity of the story, or thinking I derived it from Wind River, will have to see it now. Thanks for the recommendation. That is totally fair. My dad could have made it up, maybe to cover up his disappointment in not getting the elk. But I doubt he would do that. My old man is a shit magnet, and has all of the weirdest stories about bad shit happening around him, and I've seen some of it. Totally par for the course. When I was younger, I used to horsepack around Northern California for weeks at a time. This was during the late 70s, early 80s. I rarely used a compass, but I always had a map of my area. I'm pretty good at dead reckoning via landmarks, and I've never been lost in my life. Except once. I was in the Six Rivers National Forest, heading south towards Trinity County. This is very rough terrain, lots of high ridges, steep hills, rocks everywhere, and nasty brush to tangle you. I was riding the ridges, heading generally south, and trying to find easy places to cross to the next ridge, when it became convenient. The skies were partly cloudy, and it was cool 60°F, cold for that time of year, since it was early August, and the temps were normally 90+°F during the day. I found a reasonable spot to cross over to the next ridge south of me and started down. When I got into the ravine, it turned out that what looked easy from above was actually a rocky nightmare. I started walking up the ravine to find an easier place to get out of there. A wind picked up, and it started drizzling. I walked for a mile or so, couldn't find anything that I wanted to risk my neck on, and more importantly, my horse's hooves, and decided to start up the side I had come down originally. I got to the top, took a look around to orient myself, and froze in shock. The landscape was completely different. I don't mean that it was lower or easier or less rocky. I mean that all of my landmarks were gone. Some of them were peaks that were 30 to 40 miles away. Others were a lot closer. It was completely different. I had no idea where I was, and I was completely disoriented. I dug out my map and started to review where I was, the angles on the hills I had been navigating by earlier, etc. I couldn't find anything that matched. The only thing that I could positively identify was the route up from the ravine that I had just come up. Since it was cloudy, I couldn't navigate by the sun. All I had were the landmarks that I used for dead reckoning, and those were gone. The wind was picking up, and it was getting very cold. I almost expected snow. I had no idea where I was, so I decided to backtrack to my last known position and see if I could pick up where I left off. I started down the hill, got to the bottom of the ravine, and started the opposite direction up the ravine. This time I was very careful, watching for signs of my passage before, and the hill I came down in the first place. It stopped raining, the wind died down, and the day started to warm up. I found my original trail down the hill, started back up, and got to the top. All the landmarks were there now. I was totally confused. I kept going on the ridge, watching carefully to find where I had come up before. When I got to the spot where I thought it should be, there was no sign of it. I cast back and forth for a while, trying to find my trail with no success. All of my landmarks were there to see. Eventually, I gave up and continued on the ridge. A bit later, I found an easy trail down and an easy trail back up the other side and continued on my way. To this day, I have no idea what happened. Even though it was drizzling, I should have been able to see the closer landmarks, and honestly, the further landmarks were big enough to see. To that point, thinking back on it, there was no sign that it was drizzling when I continued on to where I had ascended the first time. And the temperature swings were wild that day, easily 30-40 F. Not uncommon in the mountains, but really odd for that time of year in that place. Another thing, originally, I had chosen to descend at that point because there was nothing to prevent me from going up the other side. I could see easily from the ridge top. But when I arrived, there were tons of boulders blocking me that I should have been able to see from top. Eerie and creepy. At the time, sure, but I was more focused on trying to orient myself. But thinking back on it, even more so now. So I have two stories. First, the not so creepy one. I was about 20 miles out in the backcountry on a week-long hunting trip by myself. Woke up in the middle of the night to a bear sticking its snout into the fabric of my tent. I immediately started meditating to slow my breath and just weather the situation, because I knew if I moved or made a run for my car I'd be dead. The next morning I found some paw prints and they were the biggest bear prints I've ever seen. Second, very creepy story, was deep in the woods this time too. Set up camp in a very nice little ravine. When I woke up there was a ring of big rocks around my camping area. They weren't there when I got there / set up camp. I'm also a stout dude and I couldn't move any of the rocks. I was raised in the woods and now I refuse to go out there without a large caliber gun and I refuse to sleep out in the woods anymore. After helping my dad and brother quarter a big bull elk in the middle of nowhere, I went up the hill first because I had the lightest load. I figured I'd get my quarters to the top and then go back down and help my dad with the chest cavity. It had just stopped snowing, and when I was resting at the top of the hill, I glanced down and saw paw prints in the snow that had no snow in them. I knew based on the size it was either a wolf or mountain lion, but after looking closer I realized I just saw pads on the foot and not nails/claws making a mark in the front of the print. This meant I was definitely looking at the tracks of a big mountain lion who had been 50 yards from us as we worked on the elk. My dad was at the bottom of the hill. I had a front quarter on my back and a hind quarter on the sled I was pulling behind me and no gun. I knew it was just 3 of us and I'd be around my dad the whole time who was armed, so I didn't bring an additional firearm. I was a walking buffet standing right where the cat had been a few minutes before. There's no question he was looking at me. I calmly set the quarters down and made my way down to my dad. He agreed that I should have done what I did and even joked about it, saying at least our load won't be as heavy when we get back up there. I bet he took the front quarter. We got back up the hill and my quarters had been under shade with no additional cat tracks around it. All 3 of us were paranoid as hell walking back the 2 miles to the truck, not knowing if at any moment the cat might decide he was hungry. We made it back home just fine and laughed about the whole thing as we were cleaning and butchering the elk. Copying from a previous thread. In September this year I was hunting antelope out near the Red Desert in Wyoming. I had just shot my antelope and was walking about 150 yards out to where he dropped so I could tag and begin field dressing the animal. I should mention I'm about 40 miles from the main road, and I had not seen another human or vehicle since I got off the main road. This area is so extremely remote it's hard to even describe. So as I'm walking out to the antelope I look up, and about 1 to 2 miles off in the distance I see this extremely bright light zooming over the landscape and headed my way. I thought it was probably a game warden on a side-by-side coming to check my paperwork and all. No big deal. I keep walking out and find the animal and look up, and this light dives down into the sagebrush and I can no longer see it. It was about half a mile from me when it disappeared. I also notice I don't hear any engine. If it is in fact someone on a motorized vehicle, I'm mostly confused at this point. Not sure what the hell this light is or where it went, but I continue on and tag the antelope. It takes me all of 10 to 15 seconds to put the tag on. Then I look up and I see the light traveling away from me now, and it's about 3 to 5 miles away from me and going at least 100 miles per hour. It was really zooming way faster than any vehicle could travel over that type of terrain. Also, there are no roads or anything where the light is traveling, so I don't know how it was going so fast. I'm pretty spooked at this point. I field dressed the animal as fast as I could and dragged it back to my truck. I just had a very uneasy feeling at this point. I have no idea what that light was, although some others have speculated it was a drone. But if it was a drone operated by the game warden, why didn't he come check me out once I got back to my truck? As a law enforcement ranger for 30 seasons, I've seen some dumb shit in the woods and some scary shit. My worst was chasing down a guy who had escaped from a mental treatment facility. If he was just camping in the deep woods I wouldn't have had an issue with him, but he was routinely stealing the gusset out of women's and girls' swimsuits left to dry on lines in the campground and Girl Scout areas. The gusset, I'm told, is the cotton part of a suit that touches the outer labia and skin. It's like a cotton soft cloth sewn in for hygienic reasons, I was told. Close bracket. One of the Girl Scouts' moms came running up to me as I was on partle and told me she had seen the man run off on foot from the clotheslines, so I gave foot chase. This was in the days before our handheld radios could transmit further than back to the truck, so I had one of the older girls go make notification to my office, and like a dummy I took off running on the horse trail, where I could see fresh prints. I ran about 2 miles or so and found a makeshift tent and campground set up. I also found cord and a linoleum knife and tape along with Ziploc gallon-sized bags of these gussets. Clearly our thief was headed in a new direction. I'm convinced my intervention prevented an abduction. My guy came out of the woods and I drew my service sidearm for our walk back. I had him handcuffed and in leg irons with a leash drag so I could trip him by stepping on it. I also made him sing the Star-Spangled Banner as we ran to keep him out of breath if he decided to fight. When you're that far in the woods and unsure if you have help coming, you need every advantage. My backup met us on the trail and we were able to handcuff our prisoner in the bed of the pickup for the ride to the office. I had to sit in the bed with him for the trip. He wasn't much of a chatter. The guys went back and cleaned out the site. He had been out there for a while and was definitely a bit of a time bomb. We didn't pursue anything criminal, but he was committed someplace in Ulster County, NY, at a maximum security psych facility till his death. I used to put money on